Good morning and welcome to The Skinny for Friday, April 3rd. Good Friday to you. I'm Mitch Perry, the senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix, joined by my partner, Ray Rowe, the editor-in-chief of Creative Loafing newspaper. Hey, Ray.
Good morning, Mitch. How's it going? Great to see you. A lot of good energy in the room today.
Yeah, a lot of energy, absolutely, here in the studios here. Big week in Florida politics. Again, I myself saw Ron DeSantis on Tuesday, Jay Collins on Wednesday, David Jolly last night. A lot going on here in the Tampa Bay area. And we're going to, on this show today, really kind of span the ideological spectrum, starting in a moment with a former conservative Northeast Florida Republican talking about Florida politics. And then later on the show, a member of the Democratic Socialists of America who visited Cuba recently. As you may know, the island is enduring its worst economic crisis in decades, marked by near total collapse of its power grid, severe fuel shortages, and acute scarcity of food and medicine. And it's happening, of course, as the U.S. has been increasing pressure on the communist government there. So we're going to talk to a couple of folks who were recently there on a humanitarian trip to the island. So stay tuned for that. But first, again, let's talk about Florida politics here. And of course, we're just 10 days now passed since those big elections that we saw here. Florida Democrats pull off those stunning legislative victories. One of them here in the Tampa Bay area with Democrat Brian Nathan defeating Republican Josie Tomkow. And joining us via Zoom to talk about that and more is Joel Doc Rudman. He's a physician in the Panhandle area who served in the Florida House from 2022 to late 2024. Doc, you're there with us.
Good morning, Mitch. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning.
Hey, great to have you here with us, Doc. And I know making some time with us. You're in Charleston, South Carolina. Was a tennis event going on out there?
Well, I did want to warn you guys, Mitch, that if you hear a lot of applause after my answers, they're not applauding me. They're applauding Jessica Pegula, who's just about to serve here. So
okay, women's tennis. All right, you're all on it. They're great. Okay. Hey, Doc, really appreciate you having me on. And I wanted to have you on for a while because, I didn't really know you that well when you were up in Tallahassee covering it, but I've followed you on Twitter since then, and you're always just really opinionated about what's going on. And I think we should start out, I think you're a very interesting Republican on some issues. You stray away from your party, but you are a Ron DeSantis guy. And you said really early on, so last year, of course, we've had, the last couple of years, big conflicts in the legislature, really between House Speaker Danny Perez and Governor DeSantis. And I think you said, because you were still in the House when Perez took over in the fall of 2024, before you left to run for Congress, that Perez kind of, again, make sure I'm saying this accurately, but that you said basically that Perez really said that he was going to be aggressive against DeSantis. Is that accurate?
Well, and to be honest with you, Mitch, this was the day after we were sworn in. For me, it was my second term. It was right there in 2024. I mean, no sooner were we sworn in than they held a Republicans-only meeting over at FSU, where basically Speaker Perez, the new speaker, and his henchmen basically sat us down by classes. In the Florida House, we consider ourselves seniors, juniors, sophomores, etc. Well, I can't speak for other classes, but my sophomore class was sat in the classroom, and we were basically told by the loser of the special election, we were told by one Josie Tomkow that, hey, here are the orders from Speaker Perez. Number one, we are not going to follow Ron DeSantis anymore. And, there was a litany of other things that rubbed me the wrong way, including, hey, we're not going to have you guys form a freedom caucus. Hey, we don't particularly like the Senate either. But no, you are correct. Bullet point number one was we are not going to kowtow to Ron DeSantis anymore. So that, among other reasons, is one of the reasons why immediately thereafter I resigned from the Florida House.
Yeah, and of course you ended up running for Congress. And you mentioned Josie Tomkow, who of course did lose the special election last week. So Ron DeSantis was in Tampa, Doc Redmond, on Tuesday here at the FDLE headquarters for a bill signing. And then, he always takes questions. And I got a question in. I asked him, I said, Governor, there's been talk here. People, of course, Republicans are very disappointed about the loss here. And some people say that you were not really involved a lot. And he said, no. He says, I was not involved at all. And he says, and he was very clear. He says, and I'm going to quote him here. He says, I was very clear from the beginning that I was not going to be involved in that. And that's just kind of the way the cookie crumbles. But we as Republicans have shown how you win and win big. It's substance driven, it's leadership driven, and it's results driven. When you steer away from that and you play some of the games, you're not going to have as good a result. And he says, he went on to say, basically, he really trashed her, okay? And I know, as you mentioned, Tom Cow was a member of Perez's team there. And, there was speculation that he wanted somebody else, actually, Melanie Griffin, and that Republican did not ultimately run the race. Do you know much about that? There's thoughts that, like, there's a certain political strategist who almost dictate who runs in these primary races or general election races.
So I'm just like you, Mitch and Ray. When I got word that Melanie Griffin had thrown her hat in the ring for that open Senate seat, I immediately went to Twitter and said, we all need to rally around Melanie. And within about an hour or two, Josie Tomkow had declared for that seat. So Melanie was actually the first. But shortly thereafter, you didn't really see any postings from Melanie anymore. I think someone might have gotten to her. I think someone might have said, hey, discretion's the better part of valor here. But, it's very unfortunate because you have right now a civil war within the Republican Party of Florida. In my opinion, if you want me to frame the argument as a Republican, I think it's a civil war between the talkers and the doers. Now, you mentioned earlier, I am a Ron DeSantis guy. I owe everything to Governor DeSantis. I'm a DeSantis disciple. I would love to see Ron DeSantis become president of the United States. But you are correct. There are several items on which I disagree with the governor, but I disagree respectfully. Like, for example, when it comes to Medicaid expansion, we don't see eye to eye there. I was the first Republican to publicly announce that we need to expand Medicaid. We also don't see eye to eye on the statute known as the free kill law, where I believe that if you've done wrong by a doctor, every Floridian should have the right to be heard in a court of law. So there are big disagreements between myself and the governor, but the difference is, Mitch, we believe that adults can disagree respectfully. On those two items, the governor's never ostracized me. He's never not included me in events. He's never not sought my opinion. But the difference here is that Josie Tomkow and Speaker Danny Perez, they went about this matter entirely differently. They declared war on the DeSantis agenda. And to be honest with you guys, I think those chickens are going to come home to roost here in November.
Yeah, let's talk about that again. If we're just tuning in right now, we're speaking to Joel Redmond, former legislator from the Panhandle area. And I think you have a podcast now, Doc Redmond. Is that correct?
That's right. And on our podcast on YouTube, it's called Making Waves, the Florida Report. We actually honored Danny Perez 2 weeks ago. We gave him an award. We gave him an award for the most effective legislator when it comes to the liberal agenda. Because, Mitch, when you think about it, right, if the Democrats had more members than 33 or 34 or whatever they have, what would be their goal? Their goal would be to obstruct the DeSantis agenda at every turn. And now that I'm on the outside, Mitch, that's all I see is Danny Perez's legacy. Can you point to any one legislative agenda or idea that we're going to remember Danny Perez for? Unfortunately, I think we're going to remember him for taking back the House. Whatever that means. I still don't understand who we're taking it back from. Are we taking it back from the Floridian people, or are we taking it back from the Republicans? I thought he was a Republican.
Well, Doc, you just said something. So you really think, we're all watching this, of course, who follow Florida politics to see if those special election upsets by Democrats last week, which were pretty amazing, right? You had here in Hillsborough County a Republican +9, +10 advantage, and the Democrat won by 400 votes, got outspent 10-1. Do you see a lot of, obviously Republicans have super majorities in the legislative houses and of course, big advantage in Congress. But do you see a blue wave happening here in Tallahassee and throughout the state in November?
Well, you got to be careful when you use the term wave, because the term wave means different things to different people. I do believe that unless the Republicans really change course and rather quickly, perhaps these special sessions will give them an opportunity to do so. But unless they chart a new course, unless they get back to following the DeSantis agenda, Mitch, I don't know what any of these Republican state reps run on. What do you run on? That we didn't do anything for the last 2 years? Right now in the state of Florida, people are hurting. Gas prices are up. Beef prices are up. People are wondering how their kids will ever be able to afford a home. And Republicans are just not addressing these primary concerns. So again, rather than renaming the Gulf, rather than renaming airports and roads, we need to get back to the issues that brought us the supermajority in the first place.
Well, let's talk about one of the things that was supposed to happen, and I guess it's still going to happen, is this issue about property taxes, right? Because I know the Republicans do say, Daniel Perez said this to me, actually, when we asked him this one of the last weeks of the session about the affordability issue, which you mentioned, and about that is number one in Florida voters' minds. And have you guys done enough about that? And he comes back to saying, well, we've done something on property taxes. Now, as you know, the House did pass a joint resolution, but the Senate did not follow, which means there's no constitutional amendment yet to go on the ballot on property taxes. But is anything going to really happen at this point? You know, Ron DeSantis was really emphatic about this. As we all know, this has been like maybe his legacy project. I've been talking about this for months before the session began. And then he kind of was been very quiet the last few months about this. In fact, Ryan Chamberlain, a representative from the Ocala area, I was reading, I think yesterday, that he's going to try to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot in 2028 regarding property taxes, which makes me think that he doesn't think anything substantial is going to happen this year at all. What is going on here, in your opinion, Doc Redman?
So again, I think Governor DeSantis, certainly in ideology, certainly in philosophy, he is the leader of our party right now in the state of Florida. And I think Governor DeSantis has actually thrown down a very huge gauntlet. I mean, if we are truly Republicans, if we truly believe in low taxes and less government, Governor DeSantis has challenged us. Now, of course, as a former legislator, it's our turn to figure out how to do this, right? If I were in the legislature right now, I would say, hey, when you buy your house in the state of Florida, whatever your property taxes are, whatever the value is at the time you buy your home, your property taxes are going to be frozen at that level until you sell your home. Again, you know, a lot of us, we have rental properties, you know, we have second home, we have investments that we've made in real estate. I've seen an investment go from being worth $500,000 to being worth over $1 million. Now, unless you sell that property, that's not a real gain. That's only pie in the sky numbers, but yet your property taxes will mirror that. Our property taxes on our investment property have gone up double. So my idea would be to freeze your property taxes at the level at which you bought. That way, you know, year in and year out what your tax bill is going to be. You shouldn't be afraid to check your mail. Now, I think the signal that Ryan Chamberlain is sending, I think that's very telling. Obviously, Ryan is a current legislator. Obviously, he has very little faith, again, in Speaker Perez and his own Florida House. He must feel like the Florida House is not going to get anything accomplished. Again, if they follow this obstructionist pattern through the special sessions, Mitch, there's going to be hell to pay at the polls in November.
Again, if you're just tuning in right now, you're listening to Skinny here on WMNF 88.5 FM. It's 11:19. I'm Mitch Perry with Ray Rowe. We're speaking with former Florida Republican Representative Joel Rudman, Doc Rudman, who served for a couple of years there in the legislature. He quit last year, ran for Congress in the seat that is now being held by Jimmy Patronis up there in North Florida. A couple more questions for you, Doc. One is, I think I've seen you write this on Twitter. So one of the more controversial bills that was passed in the session this year was HB 1471, which allows just a handful of government officials, specifically the head of the FDLE and the Florida cabinet, to designate a domestic terrorist organization. Civil libertarians have a real issue with this for obvious reasons here. The Republicans in the legislature seem to vote lockstep for this, but I think I think I've saw you say that you think this is dangerous.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're talking to a guy who grew up in the 1980s, right, where you had the Parents Musical Resource Group, where they were classifying heavy metal bands as being un-American, and you're not allowed to buy this, you're not allowed to buy that. I think when you give that much authority to an elected or in the case of this bill, sometimes unelected officials, Mitch, I think that's very dangerous. Now, my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle, I'm sure they're looking at this bill saying, well, these statutes, they can't be warped. They can't be abused. We have no intention of abusing them. But again, Mitch, you have to understand that every bill you pass into law, there's going to have unintended consequences, and you have to be prepared for how those statutes are going to be interpreted when you're not the majority party. And again, you mentioned libertarians are going to have a problem with that bill. I think any constitutional conservative Republicans should have a problem with that bill.
Doc Redman, as a supporter of Ron DeSantis, we know we have not heard yet who Ron DeSantis supports to succeed him next year as a Republican nominee. Of course, we all know Byron Donalds is absolutely dominating the race so far. Got that endorsement from Trump a year ago. He announced yesterday he's raised $67 million. He's also doing really well in the polls, although there's a poll that came out yesterday, Emerson poll, that has David Jolly only down by 5 points to Donalds, which I think is fascinating. But on this issue, we've got, I mentioned earlier, Jay Collins, the lieutenant governor. He was in town here a couple days ago. He is running. You got Paul Renner, of course, the former House Speaker, Donalds, and James Fishback as well. The speculation was that Ron was into Casey DeSantis being to succeed him, and of course that doesn't look like that the ship is going to sail at this point. Is Ron DeSantis going to just stick out, not endorse anybody in this race? What do you think? And what do you think of the Republican field right now running for governor?
So I think we have a couple really good candidates in Lieutenant Governor Jay Collins. Of course, he was state senator when I was serving. And, of course, my former Speaker of the House, Paul Renner, who's also running on the Republican side. I certainly hope Governor DeSantis gets involved and endorses one of those two candidates, because I think that would be a game changer. Right now, they're both polling in barely double digits. Some polls say single digits. But I think a DeSantis endorsement could really propel one of those two. But, Mitch, they've got to get back to the DeSantis agenda. I mean, what propelled Ron DeSantis to a 20-point victory in the first place? He was talking about the issues that affected everyday Floridians. When I was in the Florida House, I took up bills that didn't really benefit me, but they benefited my constituents. Down here, it's about beach access. Down here, it's about, hey, I don't want to use Apple Pay. I think all businesses should accept cash for transactions. So I took up what you would consider to be common sense, common man conservative bills. And what I've seen coming out of the legislature these past 2 years has just been, just ridiculous things like renaming the Gulf of Mexico into the Gulf of America. That doesn't make my life any better. And I think when the average Floridian, when they look at what's come out of the legislature in the last 2 years, I think right now they're disgusted. I think if you're a real Republican like me and you show up every 4 years anyway to vote, I think you're thinking, what a colossal waste. Danny Perez had a supermajority and he blew it. So I think, unfortunately, the Republican Party is going to pay the price at the polls in November. The question is, how many seats are we going to lose? I definitely think we lose the supermajority. Will we lose the governorship? David Jolly is coming on strong. I think, you have people like Emily Gregory, who I had never heard before, this HD 87 race. But, when I look at their bios, Mitch, people like Emily Gregory, they sound more like the average Floridian. They sound more like the kind of person that I take care of in my clinic. I look at John Maples' bio, and he didn't even live in the district he was running for. So I think we have to get back to that common core grassroots message that benefits actual working Floridians right now who are feeling a lot of pain.
Hey, Dr. Rudman, I want to ask you something. We're talking about Danny Perez, we're talking about other lawmakers, but you're a big, supporter of the governor. Do you get to talk to him much? Because when we get headlines, the governor's not doing anything to take us away from the conversation about the Gulf of America or talking about birthright and all these things that don't affect us on the ground. How receptive is he to those kind of criticisms from people close to him saying, hey, Governor, can we get back to talking about things that really affect people on the ground?
Well, unfortunately, Ray, it's the Florida House that's been setting the agenda for the last 2 years. I mean, I think Governor DeSantis has done an excellent job saying we've got to increase deportations. If people are here illegally, which frankly, Ray, that hits me in the heart because my wife is a legal immigrant. So she very much wants the illegals to follow the same rules that she followed. So I think Governor DeSantis has done a great job in terms of trying to set the agenda. But, when you call a special session to specifically address immigration and your Republican Speaker of the House says, no, that's okay, we're good, we're not going to take up your idea, we'll come up with our own, I think you can blame all of that on the Florida House. And, Ray, initially, Speaker Perez, he miscalculated. He initially thought that Senate President Albritton was going to be a party to this. And, of course, as it played out, Senator Albritton, he realized, no, wait, we got here because of Ron DeSantis. I'm sticking with Ron DeSantis. So you really have Speaker Perez out there on an island. Let's hope he changes course here in the next special session.
Let me ask you something else, Doc. Somebody who supports DeSantis, again, on the inside, we hear a lot of chirping that Ron just doesn't have any friends. He's not that likable, but you seem to be getting along with him just fine. Can you talk about that criticism on the back end and maybe his ability to build coalitions and keep friendships open and things like that? How much of that do you buy into? How much of it do you see, and do you want to dispel any of that?
Oh, definitely. Governor DeSantis has always been a friend of mine. He's the only politician whose picture I have on the wall of my office, and I served with all of them. He's a good guy. He's a good friend. He is very likable. No matter when I would see the governor, he was up there signing my beach bill into law in Walton County a year and a half ago. And, he walks in the restaurant and, he may shake the hands of people he doesn't know, but he would turn to me and say, "Doc, how are you?" So he's very amiable. He's very personable. I think, unfortunately, Ray, where you're hearing that from, you're hearing the criticism from people who are used to quid pro quos. Again, it's the old school of politics. I call them country club Republicans, Ray. They're from that Rick Scott mold of Republicans where, hey, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Governor DeSantis does not play those games. And if Josie Tomkow or Brendan Leslie or any of these faux Republicans, if they thought he was going to scratch someone's back just because, no, look, we don't play that game anymore in the Florida Republican Party. It's all about results. It's all about listening to your constituents. If you're running a bad candidate, I don't expect Governor DeSantis to get behind them.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Joel Doc Rudman, really appreciate your time. Enjoy the tennis. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Enjoy Charleston. Nice town.
Thank you so much, guys.
All right, take care. So, Ray, I really wanted to have him on there. Yeah, and I know some people are like, "Oh, you've got to just." And by the way, I want to bring David on right now, and then we'll talk about this for a second here. David, you wanted to talk about DeSantis disowning Josie Tomkow.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting, and then I didn't realize that she was part of the Perez camp, and then it was like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really, David, DeSantis mentioned like some bills. I'm not really sure. I'm sure there was some legislation that DeSantis did not support, but what I know of Josie Tomkow is she was part of the leadership team of Danny Perez, the House leader, and that is persona non grata with Ron DeSantis. And it's not just her. Karen Gonzalez Pittman, who's a tape representative here, a Republican, who had the seat that who was it? Jackie Toledo used to have, right? And that was considered a swing seat. She made some critical remarks about Hope Florida last year. He trashed her. Alex Andrade, another Republican who was leading the committee last year on Hope Florida. He trashed. He called him a jackass. So DeSantis, he has. It's not just Perez, but a lot of these Republicans in the House of Legislation, House of Representatives, DeSantis has absolutely been at war with, and you're seeing that going along in terms of why the Senate and the House haven't still haven't got together for a budget, for example, the second year in a row.
I just think, DeSantis is a very vindictive little guy. I can't say the word that I wanted to say because it's the radio. But, I just, he just likes to make enemies, I think. And, I think it's even interesting that Susie Wiles, the Trump, chief of staff, is at loggerheads with him.
Well, he disowned her, I mean, she helped him win his election in 2018, and then he spoke disparagingly of her apparently, and Trump didn't buy that. Obviously, she's sitting up there as chief of staff right now, doing pretty well for herself. And interesting, by the way, with Pam Bondi, of course, stepping down yesterday, or being fired, not stepping down, she was fired. But I wrote months ago that everybody's thinking about what does Ron DeSantis do next, and that one of the things that he might be a role for him would be perhaps for Attorney General, or I've written for Defense Department for Pete Hegseth. But that's if Donald Trump wants to actually give him a job. And we heard that they went golfing about a month ago or so, that they still have a friendly relationship. But I just don't know if he's willing to do that, because Ron DeSantis is basically on government housing right now, right? He's going to be kicked out in 9 months. And he is looking for employment someplace soon. So we'll have to wait and see about that. But David, thank you so much. I want to appreciate that. Okay, Chris is okay. I want to get Chris in here quickly, Chris, before we segue to talking about Cuba. Chris, you're on the air.
Hi, is this me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, this guy you had on that Republican show was so disingenuous, obnoxious. It really is offensive to me. he's sitting there trying to tell the people that, oh, Ron DeSantis on level, none of that scratch your back old boy stuff. That is such malarkey. What about that recent the diversion of public funds to Hope, Florida,
Right.
his wife's charity, and then $8.5 million of it a couple months later ends up in the campaign coffers of Republican candidates? That man is a liar. He knows he's a liar. And Ron DeSantis is one of the most least likable people on the planet. DeClantis. I mean, the guy's he's just filthy and it's disgusting. And that man sit there and try to tell us that oh, he's on level, reasonable, no back scratching. That's BS.
Thank you, Chris.
For the moment.
Thank you. Now I know, and I get that. I'm sure some other listeners are like, how dare you have somebody on praising Ron DeSantis? That's fine.
It's curious to find somebody who still gets along with the governor.
Well, but you heard, I don't know how close the relationship is, but the point I wanted to have Doc Redman on is because, though he is a voice, he was actually in the House last year. Look, folks, we could have people, and we do have a time trashing Ron DeSantis. That's not always the most interesting thing for me to put on the radio here. Redman is... he is worried, okay, as a Florida Republican. I think this is the interesting part because he thinks that what happened here in Tampa a week and a half ago might happen to more races down the road, i.e. in November, because of this civil war in the Florida Republican ranks. Now, whether that amounts, actually turns out or not remains to be seen, obviously. But and also, Rudman is a little different. He heard him criticize HB 1471, the bill going after domestic terrorists. He also mentioned he is for Medicaid expansion. So, he's an interesting cat, but he puts stuff out there. But yeah, he's a DeSantis guy, and he didn't really answer the question about whether he'll. I guess you mentioned Jay Collins and Paul Renner, but Ron DeSantis, is he going to even endorse? Some people think he may not now because. With Donald's looking, at least as a Republican nominee, so much like he's got in the bag.
So I was curious to know from the doc, what is it about Byron Donalds that you are opposed to?
Right. Right. Because DeSantis has never really articulated too much why he doesn't like Donalds other than Trump liked him. And if, Ron at this point, if he's not going to get behind somebody else, why does he want to alienate Donald Trump more by backing somebody else when it may be so seemingly obvious that Donalds is going to be at least your next Republican nominee? Although, folks, that Emerson poll that came out yesterday, David Jolly only down by 5 points. I think this is significant.
And you saw Jolly last night.
Oh, yeah. Jolly was on fire last night. Several hundred people at La Teresita in West Tampa. I'm going to have a story about this.
And nobody else from the Democratic Party outside of Jerry has
Jerry
stepped
Demings.
up, right?
And by the way, Jerry Demings fired his campaign manager this week, basically acknowledging that there are some problems in that campaign. The Emerson poll that showed Jolly down by 5 showed Demings down by 9. But more importantly, majority of people still don't know either of these Democrats that well. They both got to work hard. By the way, if you've been watching college basketball the last couple of weeks on CBS and the related networks, you've been seeing this Byron Donalds ad incessantly, and the guy
has been interesting.
And he's got now $67 million in the bank, so you'll be seeing a lot more of him. Okay, enough of that. Now we're gonna. Jack wants to talk. We got one more caller, then we're gonna go to Cuba here, and our guest has been waiting patiently. Jack, you appreciate Ron DeSantis.
Hi, yeah, this is Jack from Dover. How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, I mean, I know that it must be difficult, for people to be in a government position. You can't please everybody all the time. But, the job that he did with the Attorney General, the way that he stood up for, his beliefs that a person shouldn't take a political side when they're a judge, that they are supposed to stay neutral.
And are you referring to the Andrew Warren situation, the state attorney here in Hillsborough? Sir. Okay.
Yeah, I think he handled that, as by the book.
Oh, okay.
What his position allowed him to do, and he stuck to his guns. I appreciate that he did that. I love the fact that he supports the Highway Patrol and our police and their efforts to try to get rid of the fentanyl and the drug dealers. I understand that there are a lot of people that want to come to this country, and I want them to come to this country, but I want them to come to a country that's safe. They're trying to get away from drug dealers and murderers in their own countries. And what's the sense of them coming here if the murderers and the people that do like young people, whatever that is, whatever that's called, where they
Yeah, Jack, we got to move on, but I guess I'm assuming you're a registered Republican. Who are you supporting for governor to replace? Who are you supporting to succeed Ron DeSantis as governor?
What are the choices?
You're not familiar with
who's running against him?
We're gonna have. By the way, we're gonna have one of the Republicans running next week, actually. So we'll hear more about that next. We got to run now, Jack. Thanks so much for calling, though. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut him off there, but we're kind of behind here. Okay, we're gonna pivot to the situation in Cuba, which has been struggling mightily for the past few months. Basically, the last 3 months, the U.S. has blocked countries from dispatching oil to Cuba as President Trump threatens to take over the country and to issue tariffs against nations that ship fuel there, and a pressure campaign to force the communist government into submission. Now, this comes after the military, of course, extradited Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and took control of its oil exports. Cuba had been receiving fuel from Venezuela and Mexico. Now, this week, Russia did deliver 773,000 barrels of oil to Cuba, and they said yesterday they may send a second tanker there. So we'll wait and see about that. Okay, that's the preview into going into what we're going to talk about now. So there's been recently some group of residents from America, a group called the International Nuestra America Convoy, that delivered humanitarian aid there. And joining us right now, we've got a guest in the studio here and then somebody on Zoom, Manny Ramirez, right now here in the studio. He's a volunteer with Cuban Americans for Cuba, and he's a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, the Tampa chapter. Manny, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Great. And then I think, do we have on Zoom? No, we don't have Zoom. Okay, so we're hoping to get somebody else here, but Danny, we're really happy to have you here at this. So tell us about all the things. You went on a humanitarian gesture with this group down. How long ago was that, and what did you guys do down there?
Yeah, so we went down the weekend of March 20th to the 23rd. It was an international convoy, so there was over 600 of us there from all over the world. So many of us from the U.S. There was quite a number of us from Florida even. But there was people from Brazil, people from Chile. I met people from Europe, Canada, right?
Recording in progress.
All convening in Cuba for the sake of delivering much needed aid. And so altogether, again, this group of over 600 people, we took over 35 tons of aid. That's medical aid, that's food, that's solar panels, to help alleviate a little bit of the challenges right now that Cuba's facing, right? And to be clear, part of this convoy was to strongly denounce the U.S. policy going on right now that is harming the Cuban people. And it's a policy that's been going on for over 60 years, to be very clear, right? It's nothing new. But as someone who has been to Cuba before, I went in 2022, and then it was really tough. But it was considerably harder to witness the conditions right now with the oil blockade, right? And it is an oil blockade.
This meeting is being recorded.
The State Department has been very careful to call it an oil quarantine. They're very interesting how they use their language. But it's certainly an oil blockade, if you consider how our government has been seizing Venezuelan tankers. Right, stopping that oil from getting to Cuba. And then in late January, they went ahead and labeled Cuba a extraordinary and unusual threat in order to then justify imposing tariffs on any countries such as Mexico that wanted to ship oil
President
to Cuba.
Sheinbaum has been saying our hands are tied. They've been wanting to send oil, and they've done that, and they're not doing it now. And that's why this development with Russia was a really pretty big deal that happened this week. But so you were in 22. You guys, you mentioned humanitarian supplies, solar panels, cancer medicines. I was reading about medical supplies came. Menstrual health kits for approximately 1,300 women organized by a Solidarity Coalition in Mexico. Did you meet with any doctors there, any officials from Cuba?
Yeah, so we met with all different groups and individuals. Me, myself, I actually hand-delivered aid myself. So in addition to all of the aid we took on charter planes and even flotilla boats, right, arrived in the island as well. Each of us took our own sort of carry-on full of aid. And so I was able to directly deliver that aid to a big hospital that's there in Havana. Walked in with a group of us. We were able to deliver it no problem, right, directly to the people. And that's something I wanted to be clear, too, because there's a lot of misunderstandings, misinformation that was swirling around this convoy.
There's been some criticism, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and part of that is where the aid is going, which is a fair question, right? People want to know. People want to make sure that this aid is, in fact, going to the Cuban people. And I can say, as someone who was there on the ground and hand-delivered aid myself, that the Cuban people were receiving this medical aid, the solar panels that we took. We worked with civil society groups in Cuba and delivered that and distributed. We had some events where One in particular, there was a mural that we painted in a playground in Havana near the Malecón, the seawall. And we had an event there where we distributed directly to people and through these organizations. So I can clearly say firsthand experience that aid made its way to the people. And I appreciate people who are concerned about that concern, the issue of like aid maybe going to the wrong places. But I was very, very happy and pleased in this convoy and what we were able to deliver.
And just a quick note, because it's been thinking about me. I've been thinking about it since the last caller who brought up immigrants who are criminals. There are numerous studies showing that undocumented immigrants are actually less likely to engage in crime, including violent crime. So I just wanted to kind of dispel that misinformation from there. But let me ask you something. You were there in 2022. The Cuban people, naturally, by nature, all these years are very resilient. However, everybody's battery runs out. Can you give us a sense of where the Cuban people are at right now in terms of being exhausted and being able to carry on and be the resilient people that they are?
Yeah, I think like both things are true, right? I mean, we got to imagine if we lived in a country where we weren't able to receive fuel imports for 3 months, right? All the effects that would have, right? So when I arrived in Cuba just recently, when we went from the airport to where we were staying, we were traveling through Havana on a Friday afternoon, and it was like a ghost town. Right, we didn't see the number of cars as you would expect. In 2022, I saw all the classic Chevys roaming around. Right, I saw the kind of normal activities, but this time it was clearly different, and that of course was connected to the lack of fuel. Right, and so that's why the trip was so important. Right, to really not only send this aid, but to highlight and denounce these policies that are creating these conditions. And I want to be very clear, and I appreciate this question, Ray, because we can get at both things. Like, the people there were clearly exhausted, right? You can see it on their faces. Like, how can they not be, right? And at the same time, when we were walking all over Havana, as we did, I walked like 5 hours a day when I was there to get to places. We were never on time anywhere, but hey, we made it work as the Cubans do. We saw folks playing dominoes in the streets. We saw kids skating around, right?
Many of those skateboards from right here in the Bay Area, by the way.
I'm saying, like, that's why we need to get more people from Tampa to Cuba, man. There's so many connections ready to be made. Like, Cuban kids love skateboarding. They love inline skates. They love soccer. Soccer's actually getting really big. A lot of people have told me back in 2022 and this year, too, that soccer's even overtaking baseball, which is something crazy, right?
I wouldn't believe that. By the way, I just want to tell people again, if you're just tuning in right now, 43 minutes after the hour, we're speaking with Manny Ramirez. He's a volunteer with Cuban Americans for Cuba, and he's a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, the Tampa chapter. He was recently talking about his experiences on a humanitarian mission to Cuba last month as the nation goes through one of their worst economic crises really in decades. And Manny, I mentioned the criticism, so I do want to bring this out because it did get some bad headlines somewhere. Do you know who Yoni Sanchez is? She's a Cuban journalist. She's there on the island, so I respect her, basically, a little I know about her, because they haven't thrown her off. And by the way, I'm going to mention this, though. I'm sorry, before I'm kind of interrupting myself here, but there was some breaking news, right, over the last day. We should say this about the Cuban government, and that is, and maybe, again, they're trying to, work with the Trump administration. So yesterday they announced they are pardoning more than 2,000 prisoners. I'm reading this from the New York Times. Cuba said on Thursday it was pardoning more than 2,000 prisoners, one of its largest such releases in years, and the second in less than a month. The Cuban embassy in D.C. said it was a statement that it was for humanitarian sovereign gesture to coincide with the Holy Week. And last month they pledged to release 51 political prisoners after talks with the Vatican. The release of political prisoners has been a priority for Secretary of State Marco Rubio. So the politics behind this, it's always so controversial when folks go down there. Anyway, Yoni Sanchez, she had said something about this. She said Cuba's not a theme park and urged those who visit the island to defend. Now, she said defend the government. I don't know if you were doing that. She said to go engage in ideological tourism elsewhere. Here we are suffering. What is your position with the Cuban government? I know you mentioned, the United States government absolutely has been going on with this boycott for now over 6 decades now, and has really put the the screws on just in the last couple of months. But anyway, your thoughts there?
Yeah, I definitely want to speak to this criticism that we went there as tourists, that we went there to have fun. Honestly, again, I think that's a little disingenuous, to say the least, honestly, right? Like, again, we were walking 5 hours a day to get to and from, to deliver this aid, to engage and exchange with the Cuban people. I'll speak to one example in particular, right? Because I think it's one of the starkest forms of disinformation that was coming out about the convoy. So there was a spring festival in Havana, and this was a festival at a venue that every weekend they have events at, free for the Cuban people to attend. There's games for kids, there's slides, trampolines, batting cages, a music stage, right? And we were invited to attend that, and we did. And we had a few music artists on the convoy, right? In order to help get the stories out, right? To help use their celebrity to draw attention to the issue. And one of them was a group called Kneecap from Ireland.
Right.
Yeah. And they performed at this festival. It was an impromptu performance, but they offered, and the folks at the organizers of the festival said, "Bring it on, let's do it. Let's hear some Irish rappers in Cuba and Havana. Why not?" Right? And that happened. And so what we saw, though, coming out of that was people claiming that it was some sort of private concert for our people from the convoy. And that's really interesting, right? Because if you see videos, for example, of this this concert that was part of this festival, you see Cuban children all around, and there was no children part of our convoy. It was all adults, right? And so it's just really, I think, easy to sort of debunk these outrageous lies that were there. But it kind of goes to Ray's question earlier, I feel, in terms of desperation, exhaustion versus resilience, right? Cubans are not helpless victims. They're not here crying and waiting to be saved, regardless of the conditions they face, regardless of all the meddling and intervention and efforts to undermine their society and their economy, right? They keep moving forward. And for Cubans, that's going to include music. That's going to include dancing. That's going to include having their kids and having some fun and playing sports and doing culture and going to school, right?
Yeah. Manny, I want to ask you this because, Tampa, I was talking to Ray about before the show began about this, because Tampa, over the last decade or 15 years, really was kind of the leader, and our Congresswoman, Kathy Castor, the leader in changing our position somewhat on how we've had this position about Cuba going back to the early 60s. That led to Barack Obama. We just observed the 10th year anniversary of Obama in Cuba. Remember, he went to the baseball game when the Rays were playing down there. And Kathy Castor was a big part of that, I really believe, as she championed. She, in fact, traveled to Cuba herself, and I think it was 2013, and came back and said we should end the sanctions. And that was a real big moment because just you look at the history of Florida, particularly lawmakers, Democrats and Republicans alike. It's a little different down in Miami. Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the company basically taking the line that the Republicans do down there, the Marco Rubio line, right? This is, we're fighting this, we're not going to give it an inch. And Rubio, by the way, was very resistant. He didn't. When Marco Rubio was a senator, he really never traveled to Tampa too much, and some people thought it was really because he was down because the Chamber of Commerce was for these economic efforts. I bring that up to say that it's changed since then, right? You had Congresswoman Castor. Basically, she has changed her position on this somewhat. In fact, I wrote a story about this going back 3 years ago, right? There was an incident, actually a famous incident at Mise en Place here, where the Cuban ambassador visited, and the legislature, certain members made it sound like basically, it was kind of like McCarthyism. You met with, they were trying to out the people who met there. There was a bill actually they proposed, didn't get through, but I wrote about it up in Tallahassee. Danny Alvarez, who was a local lawmaker here in Tampa, Republican, he was very much for it, saying it was disgusting that people had met with the Cuban ambassador. And I did talk to Kathy Castor at that time in 2023, and I asked her about where was her attitude on this, and she said she had changed. I'm going to read a quote from her. She says, in the intervening years, since 10 years ago roughly, the Cuban government has become even more repressive, and so my view has definitely changed from a time of being able to work with the Cuban government. She said, they have just turned their backs on their people, especially what happened with the Cuban government repressive response to the July 11, 2021 protest on the island and subsequent detention of hundreds of protesters. It really dampened a new chapter in the bilateral relationship. Now, then Trump came in, of course. He changed a lot what Obama did. Biden changed some of it back, not a whole lot. And Trump, of course, is doing what he's doing now. Your thoughts about how we've seen this change in the Tampa Bay area when it comes to Cuba and America trying to get closer relations?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll say a few things on this. First and foremost, there's no justification for what amounts to collective punishment against the Cuban people. But that's what folks like Kathy Castor have to do, right? They're desperate to try to frame things in a certain way to say, like, yeah, let's have the most powerful country sanction an island of 10 million people. And I want to quickly give Kathy Castor credit, right, for when under the Obama administration she did take those historic steps towards engagement. But it's really sad. It's really disappointing that she's since then walked away from it, even under the Biden administration and also under the Trump administration. And I think, to the research you've done, the writing you've done, and what others have done, it clearly shows that Kathy Castor is fully aware that engagement is what moves us forward. Diplomacy is what moves us forward. Not sanctions, not demonization, not any of that. And what I'll say is that oftentimes Cuban Americans, and I'm a Cuban American, were painted as a monolith. People take this small, powerful group in Miami that is calling for these harmful policies, calling for these devastating things, and saying that that's what all Cuban Americans want. Not at all. And that's partly what this group that I'm a part of, Cuban Americans for Cuba, is all about, is in order to point out how under the Obama administration, when that administration was able to lift just some of the sanctions, right? In the over 60 years since the revolution in Cuba, that point in time was clearly provided an economic benefit that was real, that was tangible. And we know that, and we have that example. And we know if we build on that, that can bring so much good to the Cuban people, and that is what they want. I want to be very clear about that too, because some people suggest that the Cuban people are asking us to inflict sanctions, asking us to intervene, even militarily. And that's absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
That's absolutely ridiculous.
Let me
that
ask
can
you
be further from the truth.
Something, man, coming back home, right? You go to Cuba with this convoy, you have to come back. I think most everybody's going to connect through Miami. The Nation reported that at least 18 travelers had their cell phones, tablets, laptops, and Kindles seized. Yep. What was your interaction like with federal agents when you came back?
Yeah, so on Friday when we arrived in Cuba, we got the news that Trump was going to be putting ICE in airports on Monday, the day we were planning to return. So we were stressed, to say the least, all weekend, right, about that alone, let alone all the things going on in Cuba. My main group, so mind you, 600 people, a part of this convoy, but some of us arrived different times, returned different times, right? My group, we returned on Monday. Luckily, we didn't face any ICE agents there, but there were secondary screenings, as there usually is. And then there was this group that you're referencing returned Wednesday of that week in late March. And 18 to 20 of them were interrogated. And a few of them had their phones fully confiscated, and told that they will have their phones shipped to them later. Yeah. Mailed back. Insane.
Again, we're talking right now with Manny Ramirez. He is a volunteer with Cuban Americans for Cuba, and he's a member of the DSA Tampa. By the way, DSA Tampa, they're doing, you guys are having an event next week or two, is that correct? I think I got something on that. Are you aware of that? I don't want to catch you unaware.
I think like movie screening or maybe reading something, maybe.
We got all kinds of events. Yeah. People should check out tampadsa.org. April 19th, I know we're doing a walking tour of Ybor City to talk about the labor history.
That's what it was.
Which is an important history that, some of us, especially Cuban Americans, are trying to extend that history, right? That is a strong history of not only labor organizing, but being in solidarity with Cuban independence and Cuban sovereignty, right? And that's the kind of story we're trying to continue and call out, is that what the Cuban people want first and foremost is to be able to decide their own internal affairs on their own terms.
Manny, let me ask you this, because you did mention this about people saying they want military intervention. I don't know, Donald Trump he's talked a lot of, it's weird, right, how he's discussed Cuba. It's not weird what he's done in terms of like stopping oil from getting there, but in terms of because Venezuela, quote unquote, went well, right, in terms of removing Maduro, and we've got Darcy Rodriguez in there, and we'll see if what's going to happen with that government there. It's a lot different what's happening in Iran, obviously, right now, but it's been floated out there that they're ready to do it. Obviously, Marco Rubio, this is his dream, representing as a Secretary of State to overturn the Castro, well, not Castro government anymore, but nevertheless, he's still a communist government. We don't know what's going to happen at all, but it seems like with Trump, with almost 3 years left in his administration, he's talked so much about it. There's something's going to happen here. Did you talk to folks about this at all, what they've heard from the administration? Obviously, if it comes to military, I'm sure they're very concerned about that. Nobody wants that, I don't believe. I do believe you when you say that. But in terms of something that could change the leadership of the government there, that could possibly make their lives better, I guess, is obviously the key, whether it's, whoever it's coming from. Anyway, there's a lot happening with Trump, and I don't really know what he's talking about other than he says that he wants to change what the leadership is there.
Well, I also want to highlight something that Trump said not too long ago. He said, in regards to Cuba, he said, I can free it, I can take it, I can do whatever I want. And that's despicable. And I want to speak directly to my amazing Cuban-American community right now. Like, we cannot support these people. We cannot support these people that continue to try to manipulate us into agreeing to a policy to starve our own family members on the island. We cannot stand that any longer. We have to know from history that there is a long history of these failed, egregious policies. U.S. intervention has not brought freedom or prosperity anywhere, whether that's Guatemala, Chile, Dominican Republic, Iraq, Afghanistan. We know this. And so we have to unite. We have to take a stand against this. And in terms of the Cuban people, in Cuba, there's a wide range of politics, right?
Yeah.
And you will be very hard pressed to find a single Cuban who is not critical of the government in some way, and that includes the most sort of dedicated revolutionary socialists, right? They're some of the most critical of their own government, right? But again, we talk to a wide range of people. We talk to doctors, to teachers, just random people on the street in Cuba. And we, of course, saw a wide range of politics. But again, consistently, again and again and again, people in Cuba are against the blockade. They're against the sanctions. They want to be able to decide their own internal affairs on their own terms.
Man, we do have a phone call here, so I want to bring this caller in. Nancy from St. Petersburg. Hi, you're on the air.
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Listen, Mr. Ramirez, I hope you'll write a book, because I have my Cuba is deep in my heart. Always has been. Actually, ever since Castro appeared on our Life magazine when he was our hero. And you don't remember that, but I'm 81, almost 81, and I do remember that. And what happened after that was a disgrace that the United States did to Cuba and got everything rolling, and nobody knows the real truth. But you sound like you might know something about that. So I really love to read a book that you have or anything. Okay?
Thank you, Nancy. Appreciate you.
And I think Nancy referencing Life magazine in '59. It's a pretty dramatic photo of Fidel Castro on there. Also, a subhead on that cover: "Crash diets are no good." So that's kind of a juxtaposition there for sure.
So, Manny, what's next now?
What's next for you guys? I mean, you mentioned the talk about labor history. Mm-hmm. I always love when people learn something new about the castle, besides the fact that it's a great place to dance on Friday nights.
Labor Temple,
yeah, There's violent history in Ybor City around there when it comes to labor and the way labor organizations have been treated in Tampa.
Yeah, definitely. So we definitely invite people to join us for that. We're going to have a fun history tour. We're going to hit up La Satima Club afterwards and hang out. We invite all folks to come out with us. It's
can't mention a price, by the way, even if it doesn't have a price, just because of our restrictions on the radio. So
there we go.
You can go to Tampa DSA is usually where you can find that. Thank you so much, Manny Ramirez, for coming. I'm sure you'll be on the next convoy whenever there is another one. I look forward to hearing from you. Dr. Joel Rudman at the top half of the show. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Ray Roa on behalf of myself, Mitch Perry. Mitch, who do we have next week? We have Paul Renner.
Yes, we are going to have one of the Republican nominees for Governor, Paul Renner, on, and we're going to have also Colleen Wright from the Tampa Bay Times
talk about the Rays, the fastest moving story in Tampa Bay.
Also St. Pete politics, right? Because we've got we haven't really talked too much about the show on that. People talk about Tampa mayor. There's a St. Pete mayoral election.
That's right. Jasmine Parado at CL Tampa has 3 great interviews with folks. Brandy Gabbard included. Jim Large, former St. Pete police chief. Maria Scruggs. I think
we'll get into all that next week.
So we'll get into all that next week. That's Mitch Perry. Skip Sassy on the boards for us today. Anthony Madura on the phones. I do see Joellen Schilke in WMNF Tampa's Studio 1 with Art in Your Ear, ready to do that for you and send you off into the weekend with a nice mix of information and music and loveliness. Thank you so much for listening to The Skinny here on WMNF Tampa. Thank you for supporting this long-standing, decades-long experiment in community radio. It's been a lot of fun to be on here, and we can't wait to hear from you next week. Have a great weekend.